Everyone likes to think they are truth-seeking, that they only believe what is true. But Rav Dessler raises a disturbing possibility. What if the biggest obstacle to truth is not just lack of intelligence or lack of evidence or information, but it's our own character? What if some of the things we are convinced are true are really just conclusions that our own desires needed us to reach? Because if the truth would force us to change, to apologize, to sacrifice, accept responsibility, or admit that we were wrong, then we are no longer neutral investigators on the search for truth. Our will has now become involved. And once the will is involved, the intellect is no longer free. In other videos, we discussed how refining our character traits helps us become more like God, more godly, possessing more goodness. But Rabbi Eliyahu Dessler gives us another reason why refining our character traits is necessary. Without character refinement, we cannot fully trust our own thinking. For example, if the heart is biased, the mind may become very good at defending that bias. Let's delve more into how we think. Imagine a scientist who is trying to do an experiment to arrive at the truth. In order to arrive at the truth, the scientist must have accurate and precise measuring equipment. If the scientist doesn't, the data will be distorted, no matter how brilliant that scientist is. Rabbi Dessler argues that the human mind works the same way. The intellect is our measuring instrument for truth, but if the heart is biased, the mind will not measure accurately. And this is all because there is no thinking without prior interest. Let's explain what we mean. We do not pay equal attention to everything. The things that we notice are the things that matter to us. The things that we remember are the things that interest us. We think about what we care about. For example, imagine two people listening to the exact same speech, but one person is trying to become wealthy and the other person is struggling with his marriage. The speaker briefly mentions investing, then briefly mentions patience, humility, and listening. The first person who's trying to become wealthy will walk away remembering the investing point. The second person who's having a problem with his marriage will come away remembering the part about patience. Both people listened to the same speech, but because they are interested in different things, they paid attention to certain things, remembered certain things, and then thought about those certain things. What doesn't touch our interest and concern, a lot of times just passes through us unnoticed. But what is the source of this interest and concern? Rabbi Dessler says that it is the will. The will means the inner drives of the person. It's what we want, what we fear, what we wish to avoid, what we love, and what we hope for. All of these inner drives. And these inner drives create our interest. For example, if a person has an inner drive, a want for honor, he becomes very sensitive as to whether people respect him. He pays more interest to that. He'll notice the small insults, he'll remember the compliments, and he'll think often about his reputation. On the other hand, if a person wants comfort, he then becomes interested in arguments that justify him taking it easy. If a person fears being wrong, he becomes interested in arguments about defending himself. So the will is the force underneath our attention. It is what causes certain things to matter to us. And once something captures our attention, then our intellect begins to work on it. So in short, the will says, this matters to me. The intellect says, okay, let's think about it. Let's look at a few more examples to help this become more concrete, because it's not like everyday language. A person who wants to buy an expensive car becomes then very interested in reviews that seem to prove that the expensive car is practical and a good investment or safe. His will wants the car. His intellect then gathers the arguments to satisfy his will. Another example, a person does not want to apologize, so then he becomes very interested in arguments proving the other side is wrong. His will wants to protect his ego, so then his intellect becomes his defense attorney. One more, a person wants to avoid religious obligation, so then he may become very interested in philosophical arguments against religious obligation. His will wants freedom from restraint, so his intellect begins searching for justification. So you got the will, and then the intellect to back up the will. So now that we've established in part how our thinking works, we can begin to understand why certain questions are easy for us, and other questions are really hard for us. Reason is an intellectual tool that all of us use. It helps us get from where we are to where we want to go. And the better your reasoning, the more efficiently you'll be able to get to your goal, to where you want to go. But reason alone cannot tell you what that goal should be. It can't tell you where you should want to go. For example, if my goal is to make money, then reason can tell me how to make more money given the world that we live in. And if my goal is to avoid being homeless and starving, reason tells me that I should then make money and buy food and pay for shelter. But notice what reason is doing here. It is helping me reach a goal that I already have. Reason can tell me what I should do given my goal. But reason by itself does not create the goal. Reason by itself does not generate what I care about. Reason is just the intellectual tool. It's what comes after the will. The concern, the will, comes first. And only then does reason begin to work. I want to avoid hunger and homelessness, so reason, my intellect, thinks about how to get food and shelter. I want money, so my intellect, reason, thinks about how to earn money. So reason does not decide what goals we should pursue. That is determined by our will. And that is also why the hardest questions are the big life questions, like, what should I care about? What should my goal be? What should I live for? Am I wrong? Do I need to change? These aren't just technical problems like math problems or reasoning problems. Reasoning problems don't really have much personal interest. These big life questions touch our will. And once our will is involved, we are no longer neutral. Because the answer may depend on sacrifice, for example. It may require us to change or apologize, give something up, accept responsibility. So our own drives, desires, fears, and attachments begin to influence how we answer those big life questions, those questions that involve our will. We'll first look at how powerful the will is, and then we will learn how to combat it. Let's look at what the Torah says about bribery. In the Talmud, Rava said, "What is the reason for the prohibition of bribery? Why is it forbidden to take a bribe, even though I may have a sincere intention to rule according to the truth?" The Talmud answers, once the judge has taken a bribe from one party, he becomes close to him in his mind. He becomes identified with him, and no one can see anything to their own disadvantage. Indeed, a midrash says, as soon as a judge has given away his heart for a bribe, he becomes blind in judgment, and then he is no longer able to judge the case truthfully. Our sages are saying that a bribe blinds the eyes of the wise. The shocking point is that the judge may be brilliant. He may know the law inside and out, and he may sincerely intend to be fair. And yet the Torah says that because he accepted a bribe, he can no longer see clearly. Why is this? Because the bribe touched the will. The bribe, the gift, creates identification. The judge, whether he likes it or not, now has a subtle connection to the person who gave him the bribe, and now his will be influencing his decisions. And this touches the will, because the will is what cares. The judge can't help but now care for this side. Deuteronomy 16:19 says, "For bribery blinds the eyes of the wise and distorts the words of the righteous." The Maharal of Prague says that blinds the eyes of the wise means that the correct argument will not occur to him. And distorts the words of the righteous, as in the righteous words, means that even if his attention is drawn to the correct view, to the righteous words, he will nevertheless distort it. So we see that bias does not only make someone choose the incorrect answer, but it can even prevent the correct answer from even appearing in his mind. And if it does appear in his mind, he will distort it or dismiss it. And this happens with even the smallest amount of a bribe. One more Talmudic story. One rabbi who was a judge had a tenant farmer that would bring him fruit from his own orchard every Friday. One week, the tenant farmer had a case in town on Thursday, and on his way, he brought the basket of fruit to the rabbi a day early, because he normally brings it on Friday. It's just convenient because he was coming to town on Thursday. The rabbi, who was assigned judge over the case, didn't accept the fruit because he thought that it might influence him by getting it a day early. It was a favor. And even without accepting the fruit, he nevertheless excused himself from the case because the fruit was offered to him a day earlier. He thought that he might be influenced by that gesture. So he handed the case over to the other judges. During the hearing, the rabbi happened to be passing by the courtroom, and he started to listen into the arguments that were being made. While the arguments were being made, the rabbi was like, okay, yeah, those are good arguments. And he ended up catching himself arguing silently in favor for the tenant farmer and looking out for points to the tenant farmer's advantage. He was identifying with the tenant farmer. And on closer introspection, he noticed that these thoughts were associated in his mind with the basket of fruit. And so this made a great impact on the rabbi, who now noticed the strength of the hidden forces in the human psyche. He exclaimed, "Curse the souls of the ones who take bribes. For if I, who did not take anything, and if I had taken it, it would have been my own property that I have taken. If even I had such an experience, how much more so those who take actual bribes?" If this rabbi, who is already on a high saintly level, nevertheless experienced bias, how much more so does it happen to us? And the Torah goes even deeper. This may blow your mind. It warns that a judge must not hear one side's argument before the other side arrives. Why is this? Because even if the first side tells the truth, the judge has now formed an initial impression. And once a person has thought something for even a moment, changing his mind produces discomfort. Part of us is lazy. Part of us does not want to go back, rethink, and then admit that our first initial impression was wrong. And that tiny discomfort at changing our mind is already enough to bend judgment. It's enough to bias us. We may encounter this scenario frequently. Someone tells you their side of the conflict first, and by the time the second person explains their side, you're already interpreting it through the first person's story. Even if you try to be fair, the first impression already has formed the frame with which you will interpret the second person's story. Now the second person not only has to fight for truth, but he also has to overcome the initial impression that the first person already formed in your mind. And here's where this is relevant for you. Rabbi Dessler points out that every person is a judge. Every day, we judge whether our actions are right. We judge whether our beliefs are true. We judge whether our anger is justified, whether our desires are acceptable, and whether we need to change. And our own personal bribes are much stronger than the money in the courtroom. Comfort is a bribe. Honor is a bribe. Desire is a bribe. Laziness is a bribe. There are countless bribes in our hearts. So how then are we to overcome these bribes and then arrive at the truth? Rabbi Dessler says that the answer is by working on your character. Here's what he says. We must admit that the intellect is powerless to produce reliable results in any moral problem. An approach to truth can be made only insofar as the heart is cleansed of bias. And since bias is caused by character faults, these must be eliminated and replaced by a strong and burning desire for truth and integrity. Let's make this clear with some examples. Many of us have a resistance to changing our mind even when the other side is true. This resistance may come from arrogance or laziness. Arrogance says, I do not want to admit that I was wrong. And laziness says, I don't want to rethink everything. So then, by working on arrogance and laziness, a person becomes more capable of seeing that truth and adhering to that truth. Or a person may refuse to see the truth about his anger because his anger makes him feel powerful and justified. Or he may avoid the truth about a bad habit because the truth may force him to change. Or he may distort the truth about another person because jealousy makes him notice that person's flaws while ignoring his virtues. In each case, the cure to seeing the truth is better character. Humility weakens the need to be right. Patience weakens anger. Self-control weakens desire. A good eye weakens jealousy. So the more the heart is purified, the more the intellect can see clearly. And since the Torah is truth given by God, we should immerse ourselves in Torah until it becomes a part of how we see the world. Torah is not just information and facts that we store in the mind. It is meant to shape the heart. It is meant to shape our will. The more a person learns Torah in order to live it, the more the Torah truths become our own will, our own instincts. We want Torah truths to become our own intuitive truths because Torah truths are the truest truths. And this is also why we attach ourselves to the sages of blessed memory. If my own vision is distorted by my flawed character traits, then I need guidance by those who have trained their character, by those who can see clearly. Just as a blind person who's walking through a maze will hold on to somebody who can see and who knows the path, we hold on to the Torah, the prophets, the writings, and the sages, all whose vision was purified by the Torah, the fear of God, and a lifelong working on their character. But now think about the person who is smart and well-informed, but has never really seriously worked on their character. He has never trained himself to overcome his ego, or his desires, or perhaps the need for him to be right. If such a person begins examining the fundamental questions of life, what should I live for? What does God want from me? Does God exist? Am I obligated to change? We've already seen that he's not approaching these questions as a neutral observer. These questions involve the will, and his will is not clean. It's muddied with his own desires. His will senses that these answers may make demands on him. It may require him to struggle with his desires, to accept responsibility, to live under the authority of a creator. His desires also sense that if he rejects all of those, he can live a life where he's the boss. So with these questions, his desires, his will, have a stake in the conclusion. His will rises up and pressures the intellect to accept an answer that they can live with. So anyway, now we can understand another reason why character development is so important. It doesn't just make us better people and more godly, more good. I mean, this is all amazing. But it also helps us see the truth. And now we can also understand why the Torah demands that all judges have refined character. And we can also see why the Torah is so strict about judges accepting bribes. Intelligence is not enough to make important decisions. If the heart is crooked, the mind will measure crookedly. But when the heart is purified, the intellect can begin to see clearly. This video is based on Rabbi Eliyahu Dessler's articles entitled The Truth Perspective, in case you guys want to read more about this stuff. But I encourage you all to strive for truth by refining your character. Thank you, as always, for watching.